Old Man Earl lived on a quiet country road just outside a small Midwestern town. For years, life was peaceful. Then traffic increased, and before long, cars were flying past his farmhouse day and night. The biggest victims were Earl's free-range chickens. Every week, 3 or 4 of them ended up as roadkill. Finally, Earl called the sheriff's office. "You've got to do something about these speeding drivers," he complained. "They keep running over my chickens." The deputy asked. "What would you like us to do?" "I don't care," Earl replied. "Just slow 'em down." The very next day, the county installed a large sign that read, "School crossing." A few days later, Earl called back. "That sign didn't help one bit. If anything, they're driving even faster." So the county replaced it with another sign. "Slow, children at play." A week later, Earl called again. Still no luck. "Those drivers aren't slowing down." Finally, Earl asked, "Mind if I put up my own sign?" The deputy sighed. At this point, "Go right ahead." A week passed. Then another. No more phone calls from Earl. Curious, the deputy called to check in. "So, Earl, how's the speeding problem?" Earl chuckled. "Fixed. Haven't lost a single chicken since I put up my sign." Now the deputy had to see it for himself. He drove out to Earl's farm, pulled into the driveway, and looked at the homemade sign beside the road. It read, "Nudist community ahead. Please slow down and watch for chicks." Early one morning on the Florida coast, a state wildlife officer spotted an older gentleman strolling along the pier carrying a large bucket filled with blue crabs. The officer flashed his badge and stopped him. "Good morning, sir. Taking crabs out of season is against the law. You could be facing a pretty hefty fine." The old gentleman smiled. "Oh, don't worry, officer. These aren't for eating. They're my pet crabs." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Your pet crabs?" "That's right," the old man said proudly. "Every morning I bring them down here for a little swim. When they're finished, I clap my hands, and they all come hopping right back into the bucket." The officer folded his arms. "Is that so? Well, let's see it." The old man shrugged, tipped the bucket over, and the crabs scattered in every direction into the water. The two men stood quietly for several minutes, watching the waves roll in. Finally, the officer cleared his throat. "Well, go ahead and call them back." The old man looked puzzled. "Call back who?" The officer frowned. "Your crabs." The old man blinked and said, "Crabs? What crabs?" A woman woke up at 2 a.m. and realized her husband wasn't beside her in bed. She slipped on her robe and quietly made her way downstairs. There he was, sitting alone at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee. He stared silently at the wall as though replaying an old memory. Every few moments, he wiped a tear from his eye and let out a long sigh. Concerned, she walked over and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Frank, honey, what are you doing up at this hour? Is everything all right?" He looked up at her with misty eyes. "I was just thinking about when we first started dating. 40 years ago. You were only 17. She smiled softly. "I remember," he continued. "Do you remember when your father caught us parked out by Miller's Lake?" She laughed nervously. "Oh, yes. I remember that. And do you remember how he knocked on my car window? Holding that old hunting rifle?" She nodded. "I'll never forget it." Frank wiped another tear from his eye. He looked me straight in the face and said, "You've got 2 choices, young man. Either you marry my daughter, or you spend the next 40 years in the state penitentiary." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "Oh, sweetheart." Frank took a long sip of coffee, stared into the distance, and sighed. "You know, I'd have been released this morning." An older gentleman walked into a department store looking for a special gift for his wife. He told the sales associate, "I'd like the nicest, most delicate see-through nightgown you have." The associate smiled and showed him several beautiful options. The prices range from $200 to $400, she explained. The more sheer the fabric, the higher the price. The gentleman picked the most expensive and most transparent one. Pleased with his purchase, he headed home. That evening, he handed the gift to his wife. "Go upstairs, try it on, and surprise me," he said with a grin. Upstairs, she unfolded the nightgown and laughed. "This thing is practically invisible." Then she had an idea. "Why wear it at all? I'll model it without it, return the nightgown tomorrow, and keep the refund." Feeling rather clever, she stepped out onto the porch as if she were wearing the expensive nightgown. Her husband squinted from across the yard, tilted his head, and said, "Good grief! For that price! You'd think they could at least iron it." He never saw the next part coming. But the doctor said the swelling around his eye should go down in a few days. Walter wandered down to a lakeside where a large crowd had gathered for a community baptism. Curious, he stepped into the water and stood beside the pastor. The pastor smiled warmly and asked, "Are you ready to meet the Lord, my friend?" Walter nodded. "I sure am, Pastor." The pastor gently lowered Walter beneath the water, then lifted him back up. "Did you meet the Lord?" he asked. Walter wiped the water from his eyes. "No, sir." The pastor nodded thoughtfully. He lowered Walter under the water again, holding him there a little longer this time. When Walter came back up, the pastor asked, "How about now? Did you meet the Lord?" Walter caught his breath and replied, "No, sir." Determined, the pastor took a deep breath and dunked Walter one more time, holding him under even longer. Finally, he pulled him back to the surface. Walter came up sputtering and coughing. "Well?" the pastor asked eagerly. "Did you meet the Lord this time?" Walter blinked, looked around the lake, and said, "Pastor, are you absolutely sure? This is where he fell in." A sweet elderly woman named Mabel walked into her local supermarket to buy some cat food. She placed 4 cans on the checkout counter and smiled at the young cashier. The cashier looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but store policy says I need proof that you actually own a cat. We've had people buying pet food for themselves." Mabel sighed, went home, picked up her fluffy orange cat, and carried him back to the store. The cashier smiled. "Perfect. Thank you." She rang up the cat food, and Mabel went on her way. The very next day, Mabel returned to buy 2 cans of dog food. Once again, the cashier stopped her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it's the same policy. I'll need proof that you own a dog." Mabel let out a little huff, went back home, and returned a short time later with her little terrier. Satisfied, the cashier completed the sale. On the 3rd day, Mabel walked into the store carrying a small cardboard box with a tiny hole in the lid. She placed it gently on the counter. "Before I shop," she said, "would you mind putting your finger through this little hole?" The cashier hesitated. "Is it safe?" "Of course," Mabel replied with a warm smile. "Nothing in there can hurt you." Curious, the cashier slipped a finger into the hole. She instantly yanked it back out, wrinkled her nose, and exclaimed, "Ugh! That smells awful." Mabel smiled sweetly and said, "Wonderful. Now I'd like to buy 3 packs of toilet paper." When Emily heard that her beloved grandfather had passed away, she hurried to her grandparents' house to comfort her 96-year-old grandmother. After giving her a long hug, Emily gently asked, "Grandma, what happened?" Grandma sighed and said, "Your grandpa had a heart attack while we were making love early Sunday morning." Emily nearly dropped her purse. "Grandma!" she exclaimed. "At your age, isn't that a little dangerous?" Grandma smiled and shook her head. "Oh no, sweetheart. We figured out years ago that the safest time was when the church bells were ringing." Emily looked puzzled. "The church bells?" Grandma nodded. "That way we kept a nice, slow rhythm. Nothing too energetic. Just in on the ding. And out on the dong." She dabbed a tear from her eye and sighed. He'd probably still be here today, if that ice cream truck hadn't driven past. Frank went to his doctor for a routine checkup. After reviewing the test results, the doctor looked up and said, "Frank, I'm afraid you've developed a serious heart condition. You're going to need bypass surgery." Frank didn't seem worried. "Well, that's easy," he said. "My son is one of the best heart surgeons around. He can do the operation." The doctor smiled politely. "Most surgeons prefer not to operate on close family members. It's usually better to have another qualified specialist perform the procedure." Frank shook his head. "Nope. I want my son to do it." A few days later, Frank sat down with his son. His son sighed and said, "Dad, why are you insisting that I perform the surgery? It's a routine operation, and several of my colleagues are just as experienced as I am." Frank smiled. "Because you've got motivation they don't." His son looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" Frank leaned back and said, "If one of your colleagues messes up, your mother isn't moving in with them. But if you mess it up, she's moving in with you." A fellow wandered into a small-town urgent care clinic with a huge bump on his head, a face full of bruises, and a 7-iron wedged firmly under his chin. The nurse took one look at him and immediately called the doctor. The doctor walked in, stared for a moment, and asked, "Sir, would you mind telling me what happened?" The man let out a weary sigh. "Well, Doc, my wife and I were enjoying a peaceful round of golf. We both hit terrible shots, and our golf balls landed in a nearby pasture full of grazing cows. So we climbed the fence and started looking for them. While I was searching, I noticed something white sticking out from behind one of the cows. Curious, I walked over for a closer look. I lifted the cow's tail. And sure enough, there was a golf ball lodged back there." He paused and shook his head. "And to make matters worse, it had my wife's initials written on it." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "So what happened next?" The man groaned. "Well, that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I lifted the cow's tail a little higher and yelled, 'Honey, this one looks like yours.'" He stared off into the distance for a moment. "After that, I don't remember another thing." A small commuter plane was flying from Phoenix to Salt Lake City when, without warning, the engine sputtered, coughed, and suddenly went silent. Moments later, the pilot burst out of the cockpit wearing a parachute. He threw open the cabin door and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry, but there are only 3 parachutes left." Before anyone could react, he jumped. The 4 remaining passengers stared at one another. There was a retired Army sergeant, a world-famous university professor, a small-town pastor, and a teenage Boy Scout. The sergeant stood up first. "I served my country for over 30 years and trained hundreds of soldiers. I've earned my chance to survive." He grabbed a parachute and leaped from the plane. Next, the professor adjusted his glasses and proudly declared, "I've advised presidents, written best-selling books, and have been called one of the greatest minds of my generation. The world simply cannot afford to lose someone like me." He snatched another parachute and jumped. That left only the pastor, the Boy Scout, and 1 parachute. The pastor smiled kindly at the boy. "Son, I've lived a long and happy life. Yours is only beginning. You take the last parachute. I'm ready to meet my maker." The Boy Scout smiled. "Relax, Reverend. There's no problem." The pastor looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" The scout grinned and replied, "The greatest mind of our generation. Just jumped out wearing my backpack." Tom went to spend a few days with his 92-year-old grandfather, who lived alone on a quiet farm in rural Kansas. On his first morning there, Grandpa cooked a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs. As Tom sat down, he noticed a cloudy film on his plate. Trying to be polite, he asked, Grandpa, are these plates clean?" Grandpa smiled and replied, "They're as clean as cold water can get, Em. Now eat up." Tom wasn't completely convinced, but he didn't want to be rude, so he quietly finished his breakfast. At lunchtime, Grandpa grilled hamburgers. When Tom looked down at his plate, he noticed what looked like dried eggs still stuck to it. This time he couldn't help himself. "Grandpa, are you sure these dishes are clean?" Grandpa frowned. "I already told you. They're as clean as cold water can get, Em." Tom decided not to argue and finished his meal. Later that afternoon, he grabbed his bag and headed for the front door. Just as he reached it, Grandpa's big old dog stepped in front of the doorway and began growling. "Grandpa!" Tom shouted. "Your dog won't let me leave!" From the back porch, Grandpa hollered, "Cold water! Move away from the door and let the boy out!" An older gentleman lost one of his arms in a workplace accident. The months that followed were incredibly difficult. He became deeply depressed and eventually reached the point where he felt life simply wasn't worth living anymore. One afternoon, he stood on the edge of a tall parking garage, staring down at the street below. As he looked across the road, he noticed another man. The fellow had no arms at all. Yet he was smiling, humming to himself, and doing a funny little dance. The older gentleman watched in amazement. He thought, "What am I doing feeling sorry for myself? I still have one good arm. And that man has none, yet he seems happier than I am." Feeling inspired, he hurried downstairs and crossed the street. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. I lost one arm and became so discouraged that I was ready to give up. But seeing you out here smiling and dancing made me realize how much I still have. If you can be happy with no arms, I know I can carry on with one. You may have just saved my life." The armless man looked at him for a moment, then started twisting, wiggling, and kicking his legs even harder. Confused, the older gentleman asked, "So what's your secret? How do you stay so cheerful?" The man sighed and replied, "Cheerful? I'm not cheerful. My backside itches, and I can't scratch it." The year is 2028, and the United States has elected the first woman as well as the first Jewish president, Sarah Goldstein. She calls up her mother a few weeks after Election Day and says, "So, Mom, I assume you'll be coming to my inauguration?" "I don't think so. It's a 10-hour drive, your father isn't as young as he used to be, and my arthritis is acting up again." "Don't worry about it, Mom, I'll send Air Force One to pick you up and take you home. And a limousine will pick you up at your door." "I don't know. Everybody will be so fancy-schmancy. What on earth would I wear?" Sarah replies, "I'll make sure you have a wonderful gown, custom made by the best designer in New York." "Honey," Mom complains, "you know I can't eat those rich foods you and your friends like to eat." The president-to-be responds, "Don't worry, Mom. The entire affair is going to be handled by the best caterer in New York. Kosher all the way, Mom. I really want you to come." So Mom reluctantly agrees, and on January 20th, 2029, Sarah Goldstein is being sworn in as President of the United States. In the front row sits the new president's mother, who leans over to a senator sitting next to her and says, "You see that woman over there with her hand on the Torah, becoming President of the United States?" The senator whispers back, "Yes, I do." Mom says proudly, "Her brother is a doctor." One night at a bar, a guy spotted a pretty girl sitting alone. He walked over with a smile and asked, "Hey, can I buy you a drink?" The girl shook her head politely and said, "Sorry, alcohol is bad for my legs." The guy looked confused. "Oh? Do they swell?" She smirked and replied, "No, they spread." Mary was hosting her weekly bridge club and wanted to serve everyone juicy steaks smothered in sautéed mushrooms. There was just one problem. She didn't have any mushrooms in the house, and there wasn't enough time to run to the store. Her husband, Frank, said, "Why don't you pick some of those mushrooms growing down by the creek?" Mary frowned. "You know some wild mushrooms can be poisonous." Frank shrugged. I've seen the squirrels eating them for years, and they seem perfectly healthy. That sounded reasonable enough. So Mary gathered a basketful, washed them carefully, sliced them up, and cooked them with the steaks. Still, she wanted to be absolutely sure they were safe. She stepped outside and gave a generous helping to Buddy, the family's old Labrador. Buddy happily gobbled them down and wagged his tail. Mary kept an eye on him all afternoon. When he showed no signs of getting sick, she relaxed. That evening, the bridge club arrived. Dinner was a huge success. Everyone praised the steaks and cleaned their plates. Just after dessert, Mary's young granddaughter rushed into the room, pale and out of breath. "Grandma! Buddy is dead!" Mary's heart nearly stopped. Trying not to alarm her guests, she hurried into the kitchen and called the family doctor. After hearing the story, the doctor said, "This could be mushroom poisoning. I'm sending an ambulance immediately. We'll pump everyone's stomach as a precaution. Tell your guests to stay calm." Within minutes, sirens filled the driveway. The doctor and paramedics rushed in with medical equipment. One by one, every guest endured the unpleasant treatment. Several exhausting hours later, the doctor finally smiled. Everyone should be just fine now. He packed up his equipment and left. The guests sat around the living room looking pale, exhausted, and thoroughly miserable. Just then, the granddaughter walked back in and said, "I still can't believe that man." Mary looked up. "What man?" "The one who ran over Buddy," she replied. "He didn't even stop." For rabbis had a tradition of spending a day each week golfing and discussing theology between holes. Very often they would argue, with three of them taking one side and eventually arguing the fourth one down. One day, though, the fourth rabbi simply would not budge on his point. He swore he was right and that the other three were misguided. Exasperated by the stubbornness of the others, he fell to his knees. "Oh Lord, give me a sign to show that I am right and that these other three are wrong." Just as he finished, for storm clouds blew in over the golf course. Three all merged into a single larger cloud, but the fourth blasted through the larger cloud, dissipating it. As smug as the fourth rabbi was, the other three insisted that this was nothing that couldn't be explained by natural phenomena and that he was still wrong. Again, he fell to his knees. "Oh Lord, please give another sign to show that I am right on this." As he was finishing his prayer, a single storm cloud blew in and sent a fork of lightning down on 4 trees standing on a nearby hill. 3 of the trees were destroyed and the fourth remained intact. Again, though, the 3 rabbis argued that it was a hot summer day and the occasional freak lightning storm didn't signify anything. "Oh Lord," he began again before being cut off by a billowing voice from the clouds. "He's right," the voice boomed. One of the 3 rabbis simply shrugged at this. "All right. So now it's 3-2. A successful rancher died and left everything to his devoted wife. She was a very good-looking woman and determined to keep the ranch, but knew very little about ranching, so she decided to place an ad in the newspaper for a ranch hand. 2 cowboys applied for the job. One was gay and the other a drunk. She thought long and hard about it, and when no one else applied, she decided to hire the gay guy, figuring it would be safer to have him around the house than the drunk. He proved to be a hard worker who put in long hours every day and knew a lot about ranching. For weeks, the 2 of them worked, and the ranch was doing very well. Then one day, the rancher's widow said to the hired hand, "You have done a really good job, and the ranch looks great. You should go into town and kick up your heels." The hired hand readily agreed and went into town one Saturday night. 1 o'clock came, however, and he didn't return. 2 o'clock and no hired hand. Finally he returned around 2:30, and upon entering the room, he found the rancher's widow sitting by the fireplace with a glass of wine, waiting for him. She quietly called him over to her. "Unbutton my blouse and take it off," she said. Trembling, he did as she directed. "Now take off my boots." He did as she asked, ever so slowly. "Now take off my socks." He removed each gently and placed them neatly by her boots. "Now take off my skirt." He slowly unbuttoned it, constantly watching her eyes in the firelight. "Now take off my bra." Again, with trembling hands, he did as he was told and dropped it to the floor. Then she looked at him and said, "If you ever wear my clothes into town again, you're fired." A tourist in Vienna wandered through an old graveyard, admiring the history carved into the weathered tombstones. As he walked among the graves, a strange sound reached his ears: music. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but as he listened closely, he recognized the tune, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, except it was being played backward. The graveyard was completely empty. No speakers, no musicians. Just the eerie sound drifting from beneath the ground. Heart pounding, the tourist followed the music, tracing it to a particular headstone. Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827. Shaken, he rushed out of the cemetery, and convinced a friend to come back with him. By the time they returned, the music had changed. Now it was Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, also being played in reverse. Baffled, the men decided to consult a music scholar. The next evening, they brought the expert to the grave. This time, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony was playing backward. The scholar frowned, deep in thought. "Wait a minute. The ninth, then the seventh, now the fifth, these are playing in the reverse order of when they were composed." News spread, and soon a crowd had gathered. The next day, the Third Symphony played backward from beneath the soil. Just as the murmurs of speculation grew, the graveyard caretaker arrived, pushing a creaky old wheelbarrow. One of the onlookers turned to him and asked, "Do you have any idea what's happening here?" The caretaker shrugged and said, "I thought it was obvious. He's decomposing." A man goes in for an interview for a job as a TV news broadcaster. The interview goes well. He's articulate, confident, and has a great voice. There's just one problem. He won't stop winking at the camera. The interviewer finally says, "Listen, you have a lot of the qualities we're looking for, but this constant winking? That's a real problem. I'm afraid we can't hire you unless you can get it under control." "Oh, that's no problem at all," the man says. "If I take a couple of aspirin, the winking stops for a few hours, more than enough time to do a broadcast." "All right," says the interviewer. "Show me." So the man reaches into his right pocket, but as he pulls his hand out, it's full of condoms, every variety, every size, every color. The interviewer raises an eyebrow. Flustered, the man digs into his left pocket. Again, more condoms spill out. Finally, after some fumbling, he finds the aspirin. He takes a couple, and sure enough, the winking stops. The interviewer is amazed. "Wow, that's incredible. I'd hire you on the spot, except, we don't make a habit of hiring womanizers. We've had too many harassment suits." "Excuse me?" the man exclaims. "I'm a happily married man, not a womanizer." "Well, how do you explain all the condoms then?" The man sighs. "Have you ever tried going into a pharmacy, asking for aspirin, while winking the whole time?" Three friends, a rabbi, a Hindu holy man, and a lawyer, had car trouble in the countryside and asked a farmer if they could spend the night. "I'd be happy to help," the farmer said, "but I only have room for 2 of you in the house. One of you will have to sleep in the barn." "No problem," said the rabbi. "My people wandered the desert for 40 years. I can handle one night in a barn." With that, he headed out, and the others settled in for the night. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. The farmer opened it to find the rabbi standing there. "I appreciate your hospitality," he said, "but I can't sleep in the barn. There's a pig in there, and my faith considers it unclean." The Hindu holy man nodded. "I'll go instead. Cows are sacred in my faith, but a pig won't bother me." He headed out to the barn. A few minutes later, another knock. The farmer opened the door again. "I'm so sorry," the Hindu man said, "but there's a cow in the barn, and in my country, cows are sacred. I can't sleep on holy ground." With a sigh, the lawyer grabbed his pillow. "Fine. I'll go." He trudged out to the barn while everyone else finally got some rest. A few minutes later, another knock. The exhausted farmer groaned, got up, and opened the door. Standing there were the pig and the cow.